Hi, Manish. An absolute pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Diya.
And I know you've traveled for 20 hours to make it, and you
Yes,
finally have.
yes.
But it's a pleasure. And your book is fantastic. I remember 4 years ago, your first book landed on my desk by chance. And nobody knew who you were back then. And we were like, okay, let's give it a shot. Let's read this. And it was fascinating. And I read that book and reviewed that book, and I absolutely loved it. And I think in that book lay the seeds of this book. Your mother made a cameo appearance over and over again. And it's sort of turned in this book where you make these cameo appearances. So just tell me about when did you start writing this book?
Diya, I mean, like you said, I actually wanted to write that book first. When I was 17, I thought I had it in me to write about my mother. And I was growing up in the Kotha and watching all that. And so one day I decided to write the first page, the first paragraph of the story. It was about her uh, t- uh, her family on the side of a hill near a lake, giving birth to my mother. Her mother was giving birth to my mother. So, and I found that a little bit filmy, and I thought, okay, I don't have enough life experiences to write about her yet. So I gave up and I started living, working, and lived in many places. And the distance that I had with my mother allowed me to view her objectively, um, and form that story in my head, which was, I think, my entire life. And it's only after writing my first book, the book that came out, I wrote an essay which went viral, and that led to the conception of this book. And That's when I went to my mother and I said, would you like to tell your story now? And so we sat down for about 2 years or 3 years, recording her every day, talking to me about her life. And I think that is how I kind of built on the book.
But tell me about the picking of the memoir as your chosen format. You worked with that in your first book, and this is, of course, a format you go back to again here. So tell me about the writing of a memoir and also recording your mother at a point in her life when she is recounting her life back in that period. So the authenticity of this memoir as well.
So we are often thinking as writers if we should tell our own stories first, and it kind of, seeps into the first work that we produce. So what happened is with Lean Days, the first book, I traveled the country for a year alone, and I started taking notes and thinking how to convert this into fiction. Uh, but I saw that I was also becoming the protagonist. And I found fiction a way to tell truths that otherwise I would find difficult to tell in non-fiction. So similarly with memoir, I feel like I can blend the two and leave it to the reader to find out how much is believable or not. But that's not the case with The Last Courtesan. This is an absolute, honest, and accurate account of my mother's story, which, like you said, I had to make it authentic because you cannot uh, tamper with a story like this. It would be dishonest to do that. So I let her speak in her own words and write it in just the way that she talks.
But again, going back to what we were talking about, where you said that this is a chance for her to play her music and you would play DJ. So, what exactly did that process entail?
Maybe I'll just speed up a little here and there, because sometimes when somebody's telling you a story, they can go on and on and on. So that's the DJ part that I'm doing. I'm speeding it up from episode to episode so that I don't stretch it too thin.
Also, obviously, the idea of memory itself being unreliable. So, how at that point did you string together your mother's life at a point where she might have forgotten certain bits of it, or she might remember them differently from how they were lived?
At the time that I was recording her, she was actually losing memory and she was going through a lot of chronic illnesses. So the only way to take her back into time was through songs. So if I said Hasta Hua Nurani Chehra, then she'd go right back to the start and then she'd be able to tell me what happened. So we use songs as a medium to get back the memories that we were losing out on.
Lovely. And how did you catalog all these songs? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
How did I?
How did you catalog these songs, all the songs that mattered in your mother's life?
She told me. I mean, we would sit and during the recordings, we would actually sing them to each other, and uh, I knew most of the songs that she had performed on in the 80s and 90s, so it was not too difficult to put together.
But also, I think one part of this book, which is, I think, the really hard part, is writing about your family, writing about your mother, who was in a particular profession, and writing about it with a certain kind of kindness and portraying her as this woman who fought against all odds. How did you sort of do that and straddle these two parts of it, that world which was not the most pleasant of places, and this woman who was trying to make it in that world?
So, Diya, I didn't really have to work hard towards it because it's a story that she always wanted to tell me, she wanted to tell whoever was ready to listen. So, that part of her being this strong, independent woman, living life on her own terms, is not something I had to twist into the narrative. The second part of your question was about?
The second part was portraying her with kindness. Truth and kindness, essentially.
Uh, I mean, I think we've just been honest to how it is. That's all.
But tell me another thing about your mother. I mean, what was her reaction to this book?
So she knew this as a project that was going on since 2018. And she kind of finally understood that I was doing something worthwhile in my life. Because it is very difficult for a parent to understand that their child wants to get into the arts where they have no stability, no success, no money. And coming from the hardships that she had, she obviously wanted me to be a doctor. And so, but every time I saw blood, I would faint, and she would say, "Tera kya hoga?" And she used to constantly pursue me to at least get a job in a bank. And so that didn't happen. And for the longest time, she kind of didn't understand what I was doing as a writer because her her thoughts about a writer is like Guru Dutt in Kagas ke Phool aur Pyasa, I think. Where the writer is always in some kind of misery and, and not keeping well and ill and slightly going off kilter. Um, but I was quite sure that I wanted to write, and from 2018, when we were doing this together, she started seeing signs of this in, for example, the essay which was on the internet, or if there was an article in the Outlook magazine which I had written about her, which also included a photograph of her. And she happened to see that photograph, and she said to me, ये सब तो ठीक है लेकिन फोटो बहुत छोटा छापा मेरा. So I think she wanted to be famous.
Did she ever ask you to translate the book, perhaps, so she
Yes,
could read
yes,
it?
she did. I mean, like she said for the first book also, ये हिंदी में dubbed क्यों नहीं है? So she would have liked this book also to be dubbed in Hindi, and we are working towards that.
But what was the first moment when the book actually came into your hands? Did your mother have a chance to see it?
No, she did not have. It was a couple of months after she passed away on Valentine's Day last year. But she knew. She had finally started telling people कि मेरा बेटा writer है.
And वो मेरी कहानी लिख रहा है.
हाँ, yes, yes. वो मेरी कहानी लिखा है is more important than in him being a writer.
Right. But what about the reaction of people who know you, people who know about you? This is almost like the story of where you came from as well. So what have those reactions been like?
I mean, some people from school, when I studied in a boarding school in Darjeeling, they are quite shocked that they didn't know anything about me, and we were in this place for about 10, 12 years, and they never heard anything about it. So they are a little shocked, and they are all over social media and Facebook saying how proud they are of me. But I think I moved on from there, and my friends, over the years, I've actually been telling them in bits and pieces. But like I said in the book, I didn't know what the end would be. Ironically, I had to wait for her end to give it a closure. So that is why I think I took so long to write it also.
Your book begins on a very dramatic note, if one can put it that way. Would you like to read the first section of your book and then maybe talk about it?
How many lines?
Read the first page, perhaps.
Okay. Still here?
Yeah, read. I can read till thinking aloud in the next page, so it'll be continuous.
I have entertained the thought of killing my mother. Multiple methods have shimmied on the dance floor of my neon lit mind. As we sway under the pink and purple lights, I stylishly club her head with a blunt utensil from her filthy kitchen. In particular, that hideous black bottom aluminium begging bowl in which she cooks her fragrant small grain gulab swaroop rice. Or I choke her gutka scented breath with a musty white bolster that's shining like a strange fluorescent weapon in one dark corner of her bed, as if it is a discarded artifact of an unrecorded era no one wants to return to. I chuckle when such visions tickle my thalamus. A tingling sensation jerks through my body in the same manner as, pardon me, a steaming log of stool passes through my anus. I know I sound wholly inappropriate, so I'll try sober. I often think of my mother's death for the great opening sentence like Camus in The Stranger. Mother died today, or maybe yesterday, I don't know. A few years ago, my friend Pravesh and I were walking behind the Versova Dargah, which also houses a poorly maintained cemetery. My first book was going to be published soon. You should write about your mother next, he said. I took a long sigh, smiled, feeling the cool air of the tall coconut trees from the cemetery reach us like a cue, and agreed with him, saying, I only know the beginning, I don't have an end. And just like that, a coconut should have fallen at that moment and been my end for thinking aloud.
So I think this is a good point to begin as to why this beginning.
Sometimes your parents really antagonize you, and you come to a point when you do want to murder them, don't you? I mean, your siblings do it to you, your parents do it to you. So I've also reached that breaking point where I've given it a thought. And as writers, I think we have these crazy ideas about people. Not, I mean, not particularly about my mother, but about everyone. So yeah, I think it's just that it was something I thought about but didn't want to act on. Of course not. And we say it in jest, that I could kill you and things like that, but we don't mean it. But I know it does make for a very startling first sentence, because a lot of people come around and tell me, I felt exactly like that. I mean, I understand what you're saying. So I guess I speak for all of us.
Tell me a little bit about the tumultuous years of your relationship. It's something you reference in your first book, where the first mention of your mother is actually about the fact that you've not been speaking to her for a year. So tell me a little bit about the tumultuous years.
I think this has something to do with she trying to get me married, and just the fact that I was growing older and not giving in vexed her a lot, and she at some point started believing that I am a saint, that I don't want to get married and I don't want to make babies, uh, and I'm a very pious man. She doesn't know the truth, but at the same time, it's something that constantly came up, and I tried to avoid it in many ways. But I mean, it takes a while for the parent to understand that the child's marriage is perhaps to their work.
But I mean, one part of this is that, in a way, you're your mother's greatest achievement. Everything you have achieved, everything you have done is a credit to her, and it's also her making it in this world. You are everything she's worked for. So, living with the burden of those expectations since you were a child to till date, how does that pan out?
That's true, Diya. I mean, I was supposed to be the good son who would get married, make babies, make her a grandmother, and have a happily married, settled life somewhere in Pune with all her relatives. And that would have happened if I had a job in a bank and, I lived a mundane life. So none of that was happening. So all the boxes that she had kind of ticked, I was unticking them. So I mean, I did feel like the black sheep, although there weren't any other siblings. So yeah, yeah, I guess that also led to a little bit of a distance. It did. I mean, when you're growing up, you are a little rebellious. You want to do the things that you want to do. And I wanted to pursue writing, and she just didn't seem to understand that. I would have liked to pursue music, but she didn't let me touch the instruments in the house. She said, "ये गंदी चीज़ है, ये तुम्हारे लिए नहीं है." But she was trying to protect me. You know, she was trying to see that I should have a more stable life and a better environment. But later, I think she kind of understood that इसकी दिलचस्पी आर्ट्स में कुछ ज़्यादा है, इसकी आवाज़ भी ठीक ठाक है, गा भी लेता है. So that really helped her to open up about her own story. And yeah, I mean, eventually it all came together.
Tell me about, again, when you're talking about music, music has a big part to play in this book. Tell me about your relationship with music growing up in this household, and also your engagement with music and your mother at the same time. What did you listen to together? Did she teach you songs?
No, she didn't teach me. When she was sitting and doing her riyaz with the harmonium, or when the ustads would come and play the tabla or the sarangi and the sitar, she would send me out. She would say, "Go do your homework," or, you know, "This is not for you." And so I think it kind of seeped in somehow in that environment. When you grow up with all that music, it's just वो मतलब रगों में खून में बस गया. मतलब I think it had to come in some way. I am not trained. I don't sing, but I think that music appears in my text, in the musicality of writing what I do.
And what about poetry?
Who reads poetry?
There is a lot of poetry in your books.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I think it was Proust who. No, I think it was. I'm forgetting who said this. Write prose like verse and write verse like prose. That's something I kind of follow.
So, in the making of this book, what was your secondary research apart from your mother's narrative itself? Did you revisit some of the places, some of the people to have that chronicle of your mum's as well as India over the years, from the 1960s when she was born to 2000s?
Yes. I didn't really do any research. I just followed what she said and believed that whatever she's saying is the truth. In a lot of places, it sounds unbelievable because of the kind of things that happened to her. But I have to believe that all of this was possible, and it did happen. And some of the things I saw myself, the violence, the nexus with the criminals. So, and I was, we didn't really have to do anything. I just followed her story because it's a memoir that a woman is telling me. Why would I want to um, refute that and look for other evidence? I believe her.
No, but just in terms of the sort of march of history that was happening simultaneously, lots was changing in India as well, and that was sort of happening against the backdrop of this book, right? There were the Beau Bazaar riots, there was the explosions, there was the underworld.
Yeah, so I
in
was
Bombay.
looking at that world through her eyes. So whatever she understood of history, I thought that is exactly how we should put it and not interject with my own gyan. Yeah. It's her understanding of history. She always confuses one thing with the other, and that's all right. This is within her understanding, and if from that we can infer what might have happened, then well and good.
You have written about this in your book, but for most people, the idea of a kotha, the architecture of it, comes via Bollywood. Tell us a little bit about the actual space where you grew up.
So the actual quotas are nothing like the films, because the films are romanticizing a time when quotas had royal patronage. I think there was something called the privy purse that was taken away from the the rich people, the prince and the maharajas, and so the patronage of quotas, was over by 60s and 70s, and by the time it in the 80s, quotas were seen as dens of crime and sleaze because anything went. Also, the audience's taste for music changed. Like if a patron came to the kota, they would no longer have the patience to sit and listen to a ghazal. They would have no time to listen to Thumri, and they would instead tell the gaika, the baiji, कि अच्छा कुछ चालू गाओ, कुछ फटाफट वाला गाओ, थोड़ा डिस्को. तो to to save their patrons, I mean, they also have to earn a living. So they started taking in these, fan requests and singing those Chalu songs. And now, what happened with the Gaikas is the Gaikas didn't really get up and dance. They were from Gharanas, they were of a certain distinction class and all of that. So now the patron says, disco ka zamana hai, to thoda naach ke bhi dikhao. So then the girl gets up and she starts dancing. And so from then on, it gets cheapened. The form of music in the kotas gets cheapened, and eventually it moves into sex work and goes to the dance bars and becomes what it is now, I think. So it faded out, but it was entirely on what the audience wanted, not what they could, give. They were capable of it, but there was no audience for it.
But what are your earliest memories of this space?
I saw the Baijis dancing on that parat in which you knead your atta. And I saw my mother bending and picking notes with her mouth. And I saw her, of course, dancing with the bottle on her head. And I thought these were circus performers. Or at least that is what the Kotha culture had, degraded and come into from what we see in films, which is so ornate and so rich and so beautiful. Because where was the money? And if the patrons is a Chamanni crowd, I mean, no disrespect to them. So that's how they will move on to. And it's like, sometimes you see those, that little girl who are walking on a tightrope somewhere performing for you. So that is how I initially saw it. All these girls in the kotas doing some kind of tamasha with their song and dance, which I understood. But then I also felt that it was moving away from the sitting, baithak, mehfil, gaiki. All of that was moving away. So yeah, I've seen the.
When you saw this as a child, for you, this was the normal. This was the world you knew, right?
Yes.
So how did you sort of adjust to that completely different world of normalcy when you went to boarding school for the first time? What was the disconnect, or what did you feel at that point?
In some ways, the world of the quotas is both a truth and a lie. So I took the lie to my boarding school and I said, I didn't lie actually. I said, my mother is a dancer, she's a performer, she does perform on stage. And I left it there. I didn't elaborate. So I say that I had to see in Hindi and translate in English, and I think that was the germ of how I started imagining myself also as a writer. That you see the truth and you sort of imagine it in a way that you can tell somebody to believe it or not, it's up to you.
Tell me about your journey back home. It's like you left home, traveled the world or the country, and then returning home and to your mother. Tell me about that long journey back home.
It's a very long journey. Uh, I think I'm still returning. I'm in through the book. I'm actually still returning to the mother that I should have loved more. Uh, Sometimes we distance ourselves from our loved ones, and only after they are really, after they've left is when we kind of get close. It's a little late, but that is the way I'm seeing a closure for this. And so now every time I have to go and promote this book, I will gallivant and talk about it and find myself gaining more confidence and courage to, say with great pride that my mother, this was my mother.
Tell me about also owning the term Tavaif as a term for your mother, a term that you don't use in any pejorative context at all throughout the book, and a term that your mother also uses throughout the book and is very empowered by it as a term that gives her a livelihood. It raises her from where she started off in life in the slums of Pimpri Chinchwad and where she went and how she managed to educate her son. So tell me about really owning this term, both for you and for your mother.
She didn't have a choice, so I think for her it was just for survival. She didn't think much about it. She used it as a means to an end. Uh, I, 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 I'm, I'm okay with it. I'm actually proud that she's not your regular mom, which would be very boring to live with.
Tell me about the fact that this book, again, in this lies the germ of your next book. Would you like to talk about that a little bit?
In the third book, which I will not reveal the title right now, I talk about my own years growing up in the Kotha. We usually hear about the woman and what happens to her, but what happens to a boy who grows up in a Kotha? That's the story, and it has a lot. It has some bits to do with talking about my father, which is there's an excerpt in this. So yeah, dealing with my daddy issues after my mommy issues.
Would you like to read another section from a book that you really like? There is page number 34 and a
Do we
little
have the
section.
time?
We have a little bit of time. That's our timer.
That's a lot of time.
So we have
Why
time.
haven't people left yet? We are going at our own pace, and I don't see why anybody isn't bored and has left as yet. Actually, all that jet lag has actually calmed me down.
Page 34.
Okay. One morning I stepped out went down the building and was looking for a rickshaw when Pushpa understood I was going to the Howrah railway station. She came down and dragged me back inside, saying I could not leave. Why will you not even let me leave? I shouted. Where will you go? What will you do? She said. You will be torn to pieces by this world in seconds. Do you know who you are? I am aware of my reputation. I had earned it. I was a Baiji. Khangi ho, Randi ho, she shouted. Randi, she screamed and hurled abuses at me. A crowd gathered, attracted by the booming, harsh, and loud sound of that one word. I knew what it meant, but in her screaming voice, it came out like a radio announcement. Randi. It sounded horrible. I knew it had the power to stop any man in his tracks and make him stare. It also made everyone stare accusingly at the person who was being shouted at. I was being called a Randi. I was being disgraced. I was being humiliated in broad daylight in front of a crowd. She pulled at my sari. I felt naked, being harassed in public. The word was shrill and loud and deafening. Randi. That is how people saw us. I was not a prostitute, but how does any man know better than to judge us as one when one of our own is calling us a whore, a Randi? That was the first time someone had called me a name that I was not in a in a public place, in an open street, where strangers were walking by, most of whom stopped to stare at me. Their eyes burnt into me. My skin crawled. The light in the sky was too bright, too harsh. Being dragged back from under the clear blue sky was like being pulled into a pool of darkness, into a pitch dark cave where I belonged, where women like me belonged. It was a worse feeling than leaving, to be forcefully pulled back from escaping with the humiliation that I was no ordinary woman. I was branded a whore. I was stripped of any dignity I might have had as a nobody. This was a sickening realization that I had no place in the world when I had just about mustered up enough courage to step out into it. Thank you. I hope you buy the book.
This is for all the men in the audience, as you said.
Yes,
Especially.
yeah, I do want men to read this because women by design will look at the cover and they'll say, oh, strong, independent, wow, woman, I will read her. This is great feminist literature. And that's not something I'm worried about. I know women are my most loyal, faithful readers. But where are the men? Why are they not reading this book? And they should be reading a book about a man who is not afraid to tackle issues like this, where his mother is being called a whore and he is not fighting it. He is okay with that also.
I wanted to ask you, what happens to a wife when she retires? So, what was your mom's life like after the quotas shut? Did
It-
she miss those days in a way? Did she miss the energy of that life? Because she owned that life, right?
So the life of a tawaif after her prime is over is that of a housewife without a husband. So that's the life she had all alone. It kind of reminds me of Bari Wali, where this woman, what is her name? Anupam Kiran Kher, yes. It's a Rituparno Ghosh film where Kiran Kher is living alone in a house and imagining that someday somebody will come and make her famous, which I think I did with my mother. Not entirely, but I have to give her credit.
And there's more in store, I'm sure, along the way.
Uh, we'll see.
Right. But tell me, so when she was recounting these stories to you, what did she actually think of the fact that her life would be a book, maybe in the future become a TV show or a film? What were her thoughts on that?
Yeah, I kept nudging her, saying that maybe someday we'll make a web series out of it, or there'll be a film about you. She was quite excited. Yes. In fact, our family was more excited because they thought that finally somebody from our community will become famous. And I mean, she was a performer, so she's used to the fame, and she would have liked to have more of it. I'm not that son who likes the fame, so yeah.
But tell me, there was that moment, right, when you took her to watch Gangubai Kathiawad. What was her reaction to that, and what was that moment like for her?
So Gangubai has the similar beats with her story, which is a little not. I mean, Gangubai was not a little girl when she was sold, but my mother was. So and the same beats of going to a kotha and. But the thing with Gangubai was she was into sex work, and the people who sold my mother initially wanted to sell her in Sonagachi, but could not sell her. So they put her up at a kotha, and where older Baiji taught her to sing and dance, and that became her profession. So that is the distinction that we have to make about Gangubai and Rekhabai. But when she saw the film, she understood because the problems are the same for women everywhere. So she identified with a lot of it, and she loved it. I mean, all her friends also went to watch, some of her friends actually, together, and they said, if somebody makes us look this beautiful and gives us great clothes and great jewelry and great songs, why will we not love it? Look at our lives, it's miserable. So it's also a form of escape for them, and they are thoroughly entertained by it.
So I think we can open this up to questions now. So please.
I hope not, because I've had a really long day. That's great. No one. But how will you? Acha. Sorry.
Sort of writerly question.
Yes, please.
So capturing your mother's voice in English, so how did you, what was your approach or?
Somebody wrote a review of the book. I found it on Facebook. An editor from Kerala who said, the words are hers, the language is yours. So when you read it in English, you'll almost feel like you're listening to this woman talk about herself in her own words.
No, what I meant was, did you consciously work on it or it just?
Not at all. I found that most of the things she was saying, word for word, I've written that in Hindi in the book. And I've kept the language very simple to how she actually sounds in Hindi.
But I think I want to add to this and ask you, how did you stop your own voice from creeping into this? Because that is an exercise in itself. You have your own voice, you have your own tones. How did you stop that from happening?
So that I can save it for the third book. I mean, when a woman is speaking, and let her speak. Why interject? So let's have the book in her own voice. I'm just, what do you call the yes.
Do we have any more questions, audience? Yes.
Hi, sir. Hi, sir.
Hi, hi.
You said that you were working on the Hindi translation of this work. So, what would be the title of the Hindi translation? Would it be a literal translation of the original title, or would it be something else?
You know, like J.P. Datta was once going to make a film called Aakhri Mughal. So I think I might be inspired by that and call it the Aakhri Tawaif.
Any other questions? Well, Manish, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. And all the best for your next book and continuing this series on your family. Good luck.
Thank you, Diya. Thank you, everyone,
Thank
for
you,
listening
Miss-
and bearing with us. I hope you all buy the book. It's on Amazon. You get a discount. But it's also in the bookstore, and I might sign a copy for you to wake up the inner Tawaif in you if you pick it up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Manish and Diya, for
Thank you.
conducting such a